Welcome to today's Strategic Dairy Farm webinar. All attendees are muted. If you would like to ask a question, please do so on the right-hand panel. If you can't see the question box, click the orange arrow to extend. To register for Dairy Pro points, put your membership number in the questions box. We now join Brian Nicholson, Knowledge Exchange Manager, who was on farm in September. You may have to turn your volume up for this clip.
Welcome to today's Strategic Farm meeting. Joining me today is David Cotton, a strategic farmer, Steve, the herdsman, and Keith Gue, the breeding advisor. I'd like to start by asking, since the last meeting when we had the strategic farm meeting, what's happened in that time?
Well, I suppose there's a lot happened since March. Well, March really when everything got shut down. I was trying to think when our last meeting was. I think that was last autumn. But we've been going since March when coronavirus kicked in. Then actually it's been quite a challenge. Obviously the dry May. We ran out of grass for about 10 days in the end. So we were feeding silage for 10 days in June. But that's all we had to feed. Since then we've had plenty of grass. To the extent now we've just done fourth cut red clovers and some older lays as well, and just put that in the pit. I thought, well, we could bale it, but actually if we had a pit spare, we put it in a pit. So that's been happening. TB, ongoing issue for us. We've lost a number of cattle with TB this year. Gamma testing has been one of the things they've been doing as well. So we actually had a clear test end of August, just before we started calving. So we've got to do another clear test at the end of October, and then we shall be in the clear, hopefully. That's fingers crossed. So of course, having started calving beginning of September, well, middle of August, it's meant to be the 1st of September, but as usual, everything starts early. We're on the 16th of September now, and we've already had 120 calve, I think, something like that. So calving's gone well. The heifers that have all calved have been to sex semen, and the majority have been heifer calves, so that's been pleasing. So that's next year, next generation for 2 years' time. So that's useful to have. And yeah, all systems go really. Of course, everything, August being so wet, everything's crammed into September, which is the usual challenge. We've had a lad helping us with calf rearing for the last couple of weeks, which has been useful because it's meant that we've been able to get some of these other jobs done. He goes off to vet college next week, so I should have to go back to calf rearing then. So, but at the moment we're having to keep the bull calves because of the TB shut. So I think we will have some bull calves to sort out in October as to what we do with those. But yeah, fair bit going on. Steve, like the rest of us, we've all been here all summer because it's just been, what else can you do? So it's been one of the challenges. We'd all like to get away. I did manage to escape to Denmark for 10 days, but Steve unfortunately hasn't had a chance to have a break yet, so we're looking for the break for him shortly.
Just interested to know, Steve, over this period compared to sort of most years, you know, the times we're in, has there been any specific challenge you've had to deal with, which was just something you don't normally face?
Not really, because it hasn't, everything that's gone off in the world at the moment hasn't affected me personally. Being married to a nurse, I don't get it a bit when I get home, so I've got to be careful there. But apart from that, it hasn't really affected me apart from time away. You know, I can't get time away, nobody can get time away. So that's the only thing. I have been here a lot more than I should have really.
Thank you. Good afternoon, David, Keith, and everybody listening in. David, since we're on farm, how has calving gone?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. We've now had 180 cows calved. We've got 57 left to calve. We've had 75 heifer calves. I think we've got a couple more due to sex semen, so we might end up with a couple more heifer calves. But we have also had 60 bull calves, as black and white bull calves, which is a bit disappointing. So we could have probably had a few less of them if we had the choice. Quite a lot of twins this year, which has been a bit of a challenge. A number of them. The cows, thankfully, are in fairly good condition, but twins always takes out the cows. So we've had a number of twins as well. And the milkers have all been indoors since the beginning of the month because we had 100 millimeters of rain over 4 days. So at that point, we had decided to bring everything in.
Oh, right. Thanks for that. And as far as percentage calved to date, are you more or less on target?
Yeah, we are. I suppose. I mean, we're sort of 75% of the way through. So most of the rest will calve by the end of November. I think we've got 3 to calve in December, and then they'll all be calved. So it's gone well.
That's good news. Next on the calendar will be the breeding, which is what we're discussing today. Let's hear how the focus on breeding has progressed. You're going to spot a cow wanting to be part of the filming, so maybe she's going to be a film star in the making. What were your priorities in the past, and where have you come from to where you are today?
That's 3 good questions there. Priorities in the past. Well, originally we were going down the route of we were calving from September through to April. So we didn't really have a priority. We were drifting a bit, to be honest. And I would say we were drifting on the breeding as well. And whereas we've become far more focused being autumn block calving now, so we've got to be better on fertility. Legs and feet have always been a key priority for us all the way through. I think if you look right back through, we've always been pretty hot on legs and feet. Stature-wise, they were getting too tall and too narrow as a cow, and so practically that wasn't working in our buildings or anything. So that's changed as well. But I think Keith can pick up on some of the things that he's noticed since he's been coming here.
And that is over what period?
So I guess we would have started. We probably had a big change in breeding in the season going into the back of 2016.
Yeah.
And so I think David's probably right. You know, it was the breeding was probably drifting. You know, there were little elements of focus, like on legs and feet. And the year before we came in, you'd really tried to address stature by using some lower stature and some big chest width bulls, which, you know, isn't wrong. But I think the challenge is sometimes you can become too narrow in your focus, and so in that instance we probably let fertility drop a bit and lifespan probably drop a bit, but we did make a big impact on that body size. So and then since then we've really focused on making sure we've got healthy cows that we're not going to notice. You know, we've managed to dramatically change fertility whilst really focusing on getting a smaller, stronger cow. You know, she weighs less, which means she's going to eat less, but still driving production. You know, by making sure we have a relatively, well, a very honest conversation every time we come here about what David's priorities are, looking back on the last season, moving to the next season. And we've just had that conversation today, and so we still actually are focused on, when we look at the reason cows leave this farm, it's because they're not in calf in the block. You know, it's not because they can't walk, it's not because they get mastitis. You know, it is that pressure that they have to get in calf in that 12 weeks that we're aiming for.
I think we've also, the other thing we've always been keen on is fat and protein percentage. So I've always, you know, all the way through, we were always supplying cheesemakers, right from the early days when we supplied the village cheesemaker, through to then being with Milk Link and Arla. And Arla still solids is key, and so we've kept that focus up. And we're looking now at heifers that are doing 6,500 litres at 4.6, 3.5. But if they can carry on doing that, they'll be doing 9,000 litres as cows and still doing the solids. Then we're chucking out a lot of solids, and we're getting paid accordingly. And I don't think that's going to change.
Do you involve your herdsmen in the discussions and decision making?
Oh, very much so. Very much so, because at the end of the day, he serves most of the cows. I serve some, but Steve will serve most of the cows. So, and we've all become more conscious of which cows to serve to what. I mean, we've got markers on the programme now. Anything that's a Iones cow, we've got a marker on there. Anything that's a TBIR cow, we've got a marker on there now as well. So we've got those markers on there too, to decide. And anything we decide is barren before we start serving, we can mark them on uniform to say not to serve them. So we have got some markers there, which is a great thing to do too. So, and there's always ongoing ones that you'll decide we're not going to serve that. So yeah, very much so. And we're not serving any heifers that aren't in that 2-year block now. And that's the important thing.
I think there's one. The nice thing for me to see is every year we probably step up our rate of genetic progress just that extra little bit. So the first year, you know, the big change was on bull selection. Yeah, and we went from some okay bulls to some unbelievable bulls, and you know, but without having to break the bank to do it.
No,
you know, we use a custom index here, which really means that we can pick bulls that necessarily aren't necessarily at the top of the leaderboard, but they're going to do exactly what David wants them to do. The next year we moved into starting to use a little bit of sext on those maiden heifers, and that's made the big difference. You know, we're looking around these cows today, and actually, you know, every time we look at a heifer we really like, it's out of that sext bull that we used on the heifers.
Yeah.
And we've started using more and more beef earlier on in the season, you know, and ranking those cows so we know, you know, alongside the markers for yonis and TB, but actually, you know, we know that these cows genetically aren't cutting the mustard.
There's no point serving the black and white.
So that's a cost-effective measure, basically.
Very much so. Yeah. And then everything else is just going to an Angus.
Yeah.
So, you know, once we've got our replacement heifers coming through, once we've done enough sex semen, enough early cows through, then if we've got 80 or 90 heifers for the coming year, anything beyond that can go to Angus, and that's really what we're looking to do.
And then moving forward, David, where do you see the herd in say 5 years' time?
Well, there's a slight challenge here because I still like to have some red ones, and Keith gets a little bit funny about some of my red cows, but I want to have some red cows in the herd, and actually we will keep on with the reds, and there are some good genetic reds coming through as well now.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we'll have. So we'll have some more reds. I think if at the moment we're doing 8,000 litres with nearly 50% from forage. Over time, that would imagine go up to about 8,500 litre average at still 50% from forage. That'll probably happen naturally, and you know, and we want a fairly uniform herd of cows. I mean, when you're looking around, we're looking for cows that we don't notice, that we can they all want to go through the system, and that's really what we're looking for. I can use the analogy of being in school. All the kids that go through school, a lot of them you never notice. The high achievers might come through and they win, then they crash and burn.
No.
Quite often see it in life. So I think we're looking for the ones that go on through. We don't want them to crash and burn. We want that lifetime yield. We want them to stay in the herd. And so, you know, we've got a cow now that's 15 years old, more than happy, still going on strong. So yeah.
I think the changes for me obviously are from a genetic progress perspective. You know, we've had such a success with sex semen. I mean, the big change was because the technology in sex semen had a step change about the same time that we implemented it here, and you know, we can really see the results of that going from, you know, that technology change has really just driven conception rates through the roof.
That's the key. We were nervous at conception rates. We're not nervous of them on heifers now.
And the conversation we're having today as we're walking around is actually, is there a role for sext at the very start of the block on some cows? You know, using that sexcel semen and the wide variety of bulls that we can get actually really allows us to drive that selection pressure. You know, we can create more heifers, well, the same number of heifers from better cows, and just use more beef.
Yeah.
And not only does that give us a higher value calf crop, but it actually gives us genetically better females.
Well. Yeah.
That certainly gives us a good idea of how you go about it, and it shows the focus you have and the progression you've made over time. We welcome questions, and I appeal to everybody listening to send in questions, and David and Keith will do their best to answer them. So please keep them coming in. We have one here, David. What breed are the red cows?
Well, the red cows are all pedigree Holsteins, Brian. I mean, they're all homebred from the herd, and we've been using either red bulls or red carrier bulls for, well, all the way through for the last 5 years or so, probably more than that now. And so I'd like to get to the point where we have 50% of the cows are red. The challenge then is on what the PIN and PLI will be, but Keith thinks we can get us up there pretty well on the quality of genetics too.
Oh, good. Thanks for that. Keith, you've spoken about genetic gain. Can you explain a bit about that further, please?
Yeah. So one of our the overall indexes we look to give us an idea about how we're progressing is ACI. So whilst we use a custom index on at David's to identify the genetics that we really want to include in that next generation, we also use ACI to as a rough guide to see how we're progressing. And the nice thing, as you can see from this graph, is really that those cows in the last that we've had born in the last couple of years are really starting to trend massively upwards on ACI, despite the fact that we're not even really selecting directly for it. And you know, ACI, or your correct breeding metric, you know, is whether it be, you know, if you're all year round PLI or if you're a spring block, more of an SCI. We are really starting to motor. That SCI is one of AHDB's key performance indicators, and at David's we've really started to move that forward. So those older cows were never, you know, it's not like they were slow coaches themselves, but they were only in the top 20% of the industry for ACI. Now we're looking at the cows today being in the top 10%, and actually the young stock born on farm at the minute being in the top 1% for ACI. So we really are starting to push the boundaries of genetic merit at David's. Yeah, so it's really positive. The way we really do that is actually we use two things. So one of the things used to drive this custom index is actually looking at the individual traits that David sees a benefit from. So we've got a graph here that looks at the sire of the daughter's milk along the bottom, along the x-axis, and then how much milk they've produced in their 305 on the y-axis. And what's interesting is actually when we look at David's farm is that we don't get a huge response to milk. When we use those much higher milk bulls, they don't actually produce an awful lot more milk than bulls that were, say, 100 kilos or 200 kilos of milk. And so actually one of the decisions we've taken going into this season is actually to rein milk back a little bit in terms of some of the bull choices we've used. The flip side of that is that actually when we look at the percentages that those cows are achieving, we see great responses for those. And every time we genetically select for better percentage bulls, and we make sure we're picking cows that genetically will be superior for percentages, we'll keep driving those percentages up. And the further and faster we can go with that, the more genetic response we'll see. So the index has actually changed a little bit going into this year. We've pulled back on milk slightly, up the percentages to keep driving production forwards. The other couple of things we've continued to focus on. So you can really see in this graph here. So this graph shows the amount of the average genetic value of the sires of the cows in each lactation group. On the left, we've got our old cows, so fourth lactation plus, and then some third calvers, some second calvers, some milking heifers, some bulling heifers, and then some baby calves born on the ground. And you can see that step change we had in fertility going from the second calvers that are in the herd compared to those first lactation heifers. Getting Holstein bulls as a group that will average 10 points of fertility is pretty good going. And so seeing that change and consistently having that double-digit fertility growth is really, really positive. Some of the other traits we focused on, you can see how we've also moved our weight of fat and protein significantly up. So one of the things that is really nice to see for me is that we've managed to actually drive production, so that weight of fat and protein that we're really focused on, and maintain double-digit fertility in those age groups. So we get more productive, healthier
more fertile cows, and really that will end up driving sustainability and making the herd more efficient as a whole. And then finally, the other thing we've managed to do is, whilst making those cows more productive to drive a higher weight of fat and protein that will get in calf easier, we've actually dropped the body weight pretty significantly. So you can see in the cows today, we've got a maintenance score of that's positive in every group apart from those third calvers. So 1 point of maintenance will equate to an extra kilo of body weight in that first lactation. And so we take the view that if we don't need to feed that body weight, then why should we? And so actually managing to drop the body size down, so the calves being born on the ground are by bulls that are nearly -10 maintenance on average. So compared to those first lactation heifers that we've got calving in now, they're going to nearly be 13 to 14 kilos lighter, which will really save on feed cost. And we can do that whilst actually getting those cows to produce more, which is really nice for us to see.
Thanks for that, Keith. I think we'll probably get some questions coming in around what you've just put up there. Really interesting. I think I just want to highlight that the figures were taken from David's herd genetic report, which was compiled from milk recording data. We'll send a link to the herd genetic report and other breeding resources in an email after the webinar. But just the SCI and the ACI, and of course PLI for all year-round herds, those are the indexes. The tool itself, for those who haven't used it before, it's a good way of benchmarking. It's divided into young stock as well as your milking herd. It gives you a summary, a benchmarking report, and it enables you to monitor and progress on your herd, and essentially monitor progress of your herd. So essentially that's what David and Keith are doing. That's the basis of this information that you're seeing today. So anybody who would like to receive the herd genetic report or some information about it, just put that in the question box and we'll follow it up after the meeting. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to bull choices and show a video about bull choices and how that goes about at Bridge Farm.
Keith, how do you narrow down the bull choices?
Well, I think the most important thing for us is we always walk the cows to start with. We look at the impacts of what is calving in and the bulls that we've used there. We'll then sort of look at the averages that herd is and prioritise our breeding goals. And then we'll then go back to our index. This year we've made a slight tweak to push the percentages up and reduce the milk a little bit. And we'll rank all of those bulls in that index. You know, if you don't have a custom index, something like ACI is probably perfect for most autumn block herds. And then we'll go through the bulls, what we have available, and then we'll start to, you know, nitpick a little bit, I guess is the right way of putting it. You know, for example, we didn't use one bull this year because he was an extreme milk bull. He was great everywhere else, but we just didn't think we'd see the responses that we were to make that bull as good as he was on paper.
And that really shows up, doesn't it, on the charts that you did there, because it's showing that where we had a bull that was a high milk actually didn't get the benefit from it. So there's no point going to an extreme on that case. Whereas we still want the fat and protein percentage, which is a key thing, and we are still breeding some red into the herd as well, which is part of the reason for breeding the red in was I was worried that it was getting very narrow on the genetic pool for the black and whites. I mean, it doesn't show up too much in the genetics, but it's something actually that, let's face it, it's my herd of cows. You can get personal with it a bit as well and say, I like some red cows. So there's a bit of that comes into it as well.
And what beef breed do you use?
Well, we've gone from using a Hereford to an Aberdeen Angus now. I mean, the Aberdeen Angus, partly is the gestation period is exactly the same length as the black and white, so you're not losing any days on calving, which is important. They're very easy calving too. And then for selling them on either as store cattle or as finished beef, we can do most of it from grass. We grow grass like a weed. And we discovered actually this year, we sold some Hereford stores and some Angus stores, and the Angus has made nearly £300 a head more than the Hereford. So
substantial.
So it's a big difference there as well. But I mean, the key really is that making use of the grass, and also keeping the right gestation period. And that's the important thing for us, is that if you're going to have this tight block, you don't want to lose 10 days because the calves are taking a long time to come out.
Right, thank you.
Bull-proof charts and narrowing down the choices. Would you like to elaborate on that a bit, please, for us?
Yeah. So this is a chart that shows last year's bull choices, I guess. So what you've got is the number of pregnancies we have for 4 bulls in the box, and then their average genetic merit figures in the box underneath. And then below that you have a table, and the reason we like that table is it really shows how we're selecting versus all of the available bulls. So what it does is to be in each line shows you the value you have to be in the top 10% for that trait. So for example, to be in the top 10% for lifespan, you have to be above 138 days. To be in the top 10% for maintenance, you have to be below -14. And the traits, and what we end up doing is, we look at the traits that are really important to us as a farm. So for us, that would be the overall weight of fat and protein, the percentages of fat and percentages of protein that we're looking at, lifespan, fertility, and maintenance, alongside a brief look at locomotion. So you can see out of the traits that we're really interested in, we're really hammering home on lifespan, maintenance, and fertility, doing a brilliant job. 164 days of lifespan is phenomenal. But maybe production could do with a little bit of work, especially through those percentages, and dropping the milk. So we reran our index and ranked all of the bulls that we have available today, and then narrowed those down to this group of bulls that we're going to look at using here. So you can see we've managed to really keep that lifespan, that fertility. Our maintenance is not quite as aggressive as it was last year, but still a really nice negative, and we're just a touch off the top 20% there. But where we've seen real change is that drop in milk, that increase in percentages, whilst still pushing that fertility really hard and driving the lifespan up to the lifespan as good as it was last year. So it's a really nice table because it allows you to look at how you're selecting, not only against your own KPIs and your own benchmarks, but also against what's available to the total industry. So it allows us to make sure that we're really doing a good job, and also to David to make sure that he can hold me to account.
Thanks for that. I just wanted to mention maybe TB. It's a huge problem, especially in parts of southwest and other parts of the country. Is it something that you consider when you're looking at your sires?
Yes, a little bit. I think it's not the driving force of our genetic program, but it is something that we will consider and look at. There are real outliers on that TB advantage index, and they are well worth avoiding if you have TB as a challenge. We also, because of our real superior selection for lifespan, we actually invariably get a really high TB advantage score on the bulls we use, because they have to hang around the daughters of those bulls, and if they get TB, they don't. So we do look at it a little bit, and I think it's well worth looking at if you have a challenge with TB. It is another tool in the armory to try and make sure that we continue to fight against TB, really. The data is really robust and it is a great way to reduce the likelihood of those cows leaving the herd.
Yeah, it's a tool in the armory for farmers where it is a problem, and as long as you're selecting bulls that are not are not showing a negative is what one can use.
Yeah, at least making progress then, right? You know, so
yeah. So I think it's something to consider.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. We're now going to have a little bit of input from the audience and the listeners in the form of a quiz. So I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind just to choose one of these 4 aspects, and the question is, choose the one most important aspect when you are deciding which bull to use. The poll is open. We'll wait a few seconds, give people a time. So if you tick one of those boxes that you consider to be the most important in your own business and your own farm.
We've got lots of responses coming into the poll. I'll just give you another 30 seconds or so just to get a few more in. We've already got over half of the audience has voted.
Brilliant. It's good to see what others are thinking. No, good. So we look in here, I think a clear winner is herd performance, looking at those results. So that's interesting, followed by milk contract, future ambition, and herd genetics. So there you are. So maybe that surprises you, maybe it doesn't. But anyway, herd performance was the winner in that one. Okay, thank you for participating in that quiz. Keith, we have a question coming. Sorry, I'm going to go on to Heifers now. We want to see how David determines the number of Heifers required. So we're going to see another video, which will be coming up now.
David, how do you determine how many Heifers you need?
Well, we're looking at keeping a rolling herd about 250 cows. So if we were going for a 20 to 25% replacement rate, we'd be looking at that number of heifers to come in every year. You've got to allow for a certain number not making it for whatever reason. Sometimes they get injured, sometimes just don't get in calf. So for 250 cows, we're probably ideally looking to have a maximum of 80 heifers.
Right. Keith, can you tell us how you choose which cows to breed from, please?
Yeah, so we look at all the cows every year, and we'll produce a ranking based on genetically how good we think they are, and then I'll attribute bull choices to each of those cows. So each cow's got 3 options. Then once I've done that, I leave it up to Steve.
Which I basically look at the ones you don't serve to, which can be the ones that have had fertility problems in the past, health issues, and that's the ones not to serve. So it's basically the other ones, pick the best out of them.
Yeah, and then anything that's at the bottom of that list goes straight to beef.
Straight to beef.
And this year we've just started looking at dabbling with a little bit of sex on cows. So, you know.
But they have got to be front loaded.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically in the first 2 or 3 weeks, so it's getting served to black and whites.
Right.
If they've got back history, then they'll probably go straight to beef.
Yeah.
You know, we know some of the older cows, we know them anyway. They've got a back history, straight to beef. So yeah.
No, good. Thanks for that. And I think questions are coming in, and we're going to start answering them now, what you've sent in, and keep them coming in. But I'd like to just thank David and Keith for their comments on those videos, and Steve, of course, and giving us that valuable information. And now we can move over to the questions.
let's see what's coming up. David, would you recommend the use of sex semen for other farmers?
I would these days. I mean, you know, the way sex semen has changed and improved, certainly for inception rates. I mean, we averaged 55% holding to first service across the herd, and actually pretty much the majority of the heifers held, I think it was over 60% of the heifers held to first service as well. So sex semen very much, especially on the heifers. The cows, as Keith says, we're going to try it on a few more cows this year. But that's what the way to go, partly also because of the, as an Arla farmer, the pressure on bull calves not being slaughtered at birth or being sent off farm too young. So the less bull calves we have, the better. So we will use as much sex semen as we think we can. And over time, I think we might end up using it across the whole herd.
Okay, thanks for that. Sarah, I wonder if you can, I can't see the question box, if you don't mind. I'll just struggling there. So I'll ask, can you possibly read one out for me?
Yeah, so we've got a question coming in, which is talking about conception rates. Specifically, what's the conception rate like with the sexed semen on heifers?
I couldn't tell you the figures off the top of my head, but as I say, I think we ended up at over 60% held to first service. So Steve probably be able to tell me a higher number than that, but it's not a figure I had in my head, but it's certainly as good as the conventional semen.
Right,
good to hear.
Yeah.
And perhaps it would be worth just expanding, Keith, your opinion on why people would focus on herd performance as their top selection criteria, rather than, let's say, milk contract or ambition for future.
I think the thing about herd performance as a whole is it sort of incorporates nearly all of the other options together. So when we're looking at herd performance, that will drive your milk contract, will drive your direction of your herd performance. And yeah, we need to be picking bulls that we know are going to suit the system and that we know are going to work on that farm. The joy is sometimes I think that you could see from those charts that, you know, if we were just to ask from a gut feel between myself and David, we would have probably said that actually, you know, we do get more milk from those high milk genetics. But actually, when we look at it in real life, you know, that, and we look at the data and we break it down into something a little less gut feel and a little bit more data driven, actually we just didn't see that response. And so getting into the nitty gritty of the data really allows you to make sure to refine your genetic choices and to make sure you're selecting genetics that are going to have a payback for you, because, you know, there's no point spending and investing loads of money into great genetics that aren't going to be right for you, your farm, your performance, your milk contract.
Good to hear. That's very interesting. Another one coming, which I'm going to put to you, Keith, which was just to explain a little bit more of the ACI that we've mentioned, which is the Autumn Calving Index. Perhaps you could just point out some of the key areas of which this promotes looking into the different aspects of a breed.
Yeah, so one of the really nice things about ACI, especially compared to something like PLI, is that it's an crossbreed base. So that means that we can compare a Holstein to a Jersey to a Norwegian Red, and we can look at them on a single base, and we can say, okay, so I know that this Jersey will be 600-700 kilos of milk less than this Holstein that might be 5 or 6 points of fertility less than that Norwegian Red. So the first thing about ACI that is very different is it's in a crossbreed base. The second thing about ACI is it is really tailored down to an autumn block carver. So we have a much higher focus on health traits than PLI would do, but we also have more production in it than something like SCI would. And so it really is that sort of like little bit of balance. There's a lot of fertility, an awful lot of lifespan, and a big leaning towards weight of fat and protein, with quite a lot of focus on percentages over milk. If you are autumn block calving, it would definitely be my index of choice if you didn't have a bespoke index for yourself.
Lovely, thanks for that explanation. David, we've got a question come in for you. Do you use Cedar Sync on the heifers?
No, we haven't done on any of them for the last 2 years now, I don't think. The key is to get them in 3 weeks before we start serving, to get them on the right diet and get them all bulling. So that's really what we're working on. We've had good growth on them over the summer. We were looking at them this morning and they're all in good condition. But we'll get them in at the beginning of November to start serving on the 21st, and the majority of them will be bulling naturally, and we haven't had to use Cedars at all for the last 2 years now.
Oh, good to hear that. Keith, what's your opinion of Cedar Sync? Have you come across many farms using this as well? Have it worked quite well in practice?
I think it's syncs are a balance, especially on heifers. I mean, there is value in really front loading that block with heifers. But if you're in the situation that, where David is, where you've got the ability to bring those heifers back in nice and early, really get them acclimatized to a change in diet, and get them used to the group that they're in, and that you've got historically great conception rates. I don't think necessarily there is a need to synchronize. I can understand why people do it. I can see the benefits, but I think there are marginal gains if you can do everything else right. And if you're managing to get 60, 65, 70% conception rate to first service with sex semen and your maiden heifers, I don't necessarily think synchronization is going to be a tool that is going to add an awful lot to your armory.
No, good. Thanks for that. I'm back. Thanks, Sarah, for filling in there. Brilliant. Excellent questions. Keep them coming in. There's one here for you, David. Would you buy in heifers if you're short of heifers in a particular year?
I would not intend buying any heifers, to be honest. I'd have to be really short for that to happen. Or if but I think I'm a closed herd. I want to stay a closed herd if I can. Diseases of any kind is an issue, and so my plan would be not to buy heifers unless I'd had a real catastrophe.
Right, yeah, no, that's fully understandable. I hope that never has to happen anyway. In terms of the way you're going about your breeding, I don't think you'll ever have that as a consideration. Another one is, are there any bulls in the past you wish you had not used?
Well, there's always a few on the list. I think the classic one we had was one called Zenith. It was all legs and terrible looking thing, and always lame as well. But there's always some that I wished I hadn't used. There's the ones that the flavour of the year that the salesman was getting the biggest commission on, etc. And you look back through and you're left with one out of about 30, and you think, well, that really wasn't worth it. And actually, some bulls work better on different farms too. I mean, we've certainly found this is that bulls that work on my farm might not necessarily work on Keith's, and so that's something that you have to bear in mind as well when you are choosing the bulls.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. No, thanks for that. I think what would be the one piece of advice or focus you could give both Keith and David to someone who wants to improve the genetic gains with an autumn calving herd, based on your experience and great information you've given us today? So what would you be a top tip from both of you, if you wouldn't mind?
I'll let David go first.
Oh, thank you for that, Keith. For genetic gain, I mean, I think that the key is to really look at what the main point is that you want to. We've got to look long term, haven't we, on this job? And I think that's the key with it is we don't want extremes. We want, as I said in the videos, we want animals that will stay in the system. And I think interestingly, from the herd genetics and what we're finding out is our cell counts are going down significantly year on year, and our fertility is going up. And those really, when it comes to herd contracts and farm contracts, are the important things.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that, I think. And for me, it's, you know, every time that we can keep an extra cow another year longer, without significantly increasing the cost to us of doing that, that's an extra replacement that we don't need to breed. And it's also an extra cow producing more milk. Like David said in the videos, you know, we will see a 25 to 30% uplift in production from going from a first lactation heifer to a third or a fourth lactation cow. And the older we can have a herd without significantly increasing cost, the more efficient we're going to be. So for me, I think there's a big part of find out why cows are leaving the herd, and then focus on those pieces. But having said that, just the other thing I would really advocate is don't go down a rabbit hole of only finding one thing. You know, make sure that you have 3 to 4 traits that you really want to drive, and really make sure that you are picking animals that are in your genetics that are in the top 10, 20, 30% of the industry for those traits. You know, we can move forward very fast as long as we pick the right genetics. And I think making sure that you've got your eyes open to the genetics that are out there and the opportunities you have is a big point.
Yeah, thanks. So that's 2 great answers and 2 different great views, I must say. I think it's clear, you know, it's all about focus. And when we're talking about focus, I just want to mention something that, and that's how important key performance indicators are in a farming business. We have a recently launched Kpi Express Tool. We'll send it to everybody after the meeting together with the other resources, and those of you who've requested more information on her genetic report. So the Kpi Express Tool is a quick and easy way to determine where you are on your management and financial key performance areas. It sees where you are and it helps you plan for the future. So basically that's all our strategic farmers have used it and are using KPIs to drive their business and pick various areas of their business to focus on and move forward. Clearly breeding and the way David goes about it, together with Keith advising him and Steve implementing a lot and also being part of the decision maker, I think has been clearer for us today. And I want to thank you both, David and Keith, for joining us and sharing how Bridge Farm makes their breeding decision, how you, David, make your decisions at the Bridge Farm. I hope the service period for the cows goes well for Steve and yourself. For everybody out there, we'll be back at Bridge Farm for the next meeting in the new year. In the meantime, if you'd like to see what's happening on our other strategic farms, please visit the website. There's a lot going on. There's some really interesting stuff. And I think I'll just conclude by saying thank you very much for listening to this webinar. And I hope you got value from it. All the very best. Thanks.